but who better than me?
Welcome back to the channel, and now 3 more to go. So this is the males fighter of the year for 2022. This one again, it was tricky. There were some people that maybe should have been in here, but I had to look at activity. Some people just weren't active enough to be considered. Like, absolute minimum was 2 fights a year to get you onto this list. Then we had to look at the strength of competition as well. There's a few that I know some people may not be necessarily happy with. That's cool. You know, you can leave it in the comments down below. But without further ado, let's get into the list. So, my 5th place male fighter of the year for 2022 goes to Naoya Inoue. Now, there was a lot of reasons for Naoya to be a slightly bit above this. I mean, look, he became undisputed recently, within the last 2 weeks ago. You know, at the start of December against Paul Butler, he beat Nonito Donaire very definitively compared to their first fight, which was a fight of the year candidate. This time took him out, I think it was in 3 rounds. It was either 2 or 3 rounds. It was one of those. But the reason I have him at number 5 is, okay, so we look at strength of competition. Well, Nonito Donaire, you always get points for Donaire, but you know, being 40 years old, I mean, I thought he had the secret to unlock a new way in this fight. I'm not gonna lie, but again, there was everything against him compared to, you know, the first fight. So you'd say to yourself, well, it was against a 40-year-old who obviously is not the same animal that he was 2 years ago when you fought him. You know, not the same as he was 3-4 years ago. So you just start to say, well, he's taking a bit more, so you can't really give him the same credit. That's me personally. You might feel different. The Paul Butler fight, I mean, that probably has to be the worst unification for undisputed fight you can have, personally. And that's not saying that Paul Butler's a bad boxer or a bad fighter, but he was just leagues below Inoue, and everyone knew it, to the point where it felt like a waste of time, and ultimately the fight became a waste of time because Butler didn't even try. He would have had more respect if he, you know, had basically just swung it out with Inoue and got knocked out in the 2nd round, because at least he had a go, rather than literally circling the ring for 11 rounds, barely doing anything for the entire fight. Yeah, but that's not Inoue's fault, but he did become undisputed. He has since pledged that he is moving up to 122 pounds. So yeah, just with all of that being said, he definitely did enough to be in consideration, and he's worthy of the number 5 spot this year. All right, my number 4 for male fighter of the year 2022 goes to Devin Haney. Devin the Dream Haney. Now, big congrats to Devin. I mean, look, he became undisputed this year, and he defended the undisputed title this year, both times on the roads. Now, look, there's a lot that can be said that Haney was stylistically and I guess from a technical standpoint the much better fighter than George Kambosos. But you know, with all the drama of the first fight, especially not being able to have his regular corner, you know, go out to Australia due to travel restrictions and other things like that, not knowing whether or not he could have his dad in his corner, you know, his dad not being allowed out there initially, only sort of being allowed out, I think, 2 days before the fight. All of these things going on, yet as a young man, what was he at the time, 22, I believe he was, you know, literally flying over to Australia by himself to take on the quote-unquote king of the division, or the emperor of the division at that time, as he called himself, who had all the belts but one, you know, which was the big unification undisputed fight. Devin went out there and basically toyed around with George for all 12 rounds, really only losing the 12th round, sorry, just due to lack of activity, and I guess kind of knowing he'd already done enough to win the other 11. He may have been the bookie's favorite, but again, you go to another man's hometown on, you know, on away soil, not necessarily being known for like a dominant performance type guy, the type of person that's going to beat up and batter and bloody and knock out opponents left, right and center. There was always room for those scorecards to look very funny. And I think one of them even ended up being like a 116, 112 type scorecard, something like that, where no one could legitimately give Kambosos more than a round in that entire fight. So all of that, you did that, and then had to go back out and do the exact same thing again in a time zone that's I think there's about 13 hours difference between where he is in Vegas and then where Australia, or it may even be more than that, it might be 15 hours. It's just, there's that, plus the issues. Even though he makes weight and he never misses weight, you can see he does not look good on the scales at 135, yet still managed to put in a masterful performance in the rematch. Pretty much won it the same way. He even made it a bit more emphatic in terms of he was letting the right hand go a lot more in the second fight than he did in the first. Made it a bit more entertaining, took a bit more punishment than he did in the first and than he needed to, but he just made it a fight. And again, won very, very comprehensively. It's a solid 118, 110, max. And so, yeah, undisputed. Now looking to, he's looking for the biggest and best fights. That's my reason for Devin Haney being the 4th male fighter of the year for 2022. So, number 3 for the male fighter of the year for 2022 goes to Kenshiro Taraji. Now, there seems to be a pattern here running with the performance of the year only coming 3rd on the actual list for fighter of the year. Well, you'll see why, but I felt it was only right for Taraji to get his flowers, after the year he had in 2021, losing his belt to Masamichi Yabuki in September, to then coming back, avenging that loss in dominant fashion, knocking Yabuki out in the 3rd round to regain his WBC title, then going in against the consensus number 1 in the division and the Ring Magazine champion in Hiroto Kiyoguchi, and basically just toying with him for 7 rounds before finally stopping him in brutal fashion in the 7th. Even then having to come through a little bit of adversity in the 5th round when he was looking to stop Hiroto Kiyoguchi and maybe punched himself out a little bit and allowed Kiyoguchi to come back and almost try to stop him, but just the chin and the defensive work and the evasion and the movement was enough to keep him in the fight till the end of that round. Then 6 and 7 went back to doing what he did best, just piecing up Kiyoguchi, and again, dominating the consensus number 1 in the division is a task that is not that's not taken lightly, and that's what he done. So for that reason, Kenshiro Taraji is my number 3 male fighter of the year for 2022. Now, this is where it gets hard, and this is where I know I'm gonna catch some heat, but I'm always able to back up what I say and why I say certain things. So my number 2 male fighter of the year for 2022 goes to Dmitry Bivol. Now, I know 99% of the world has got Dmitry Bivol as their number 1, as their fighter of the year this year, and more times than not, I wouldn't argue, because what he's done this year has been amazing. Look, he comprehensively beat the consensus number 1 pound for pound fighter in the world, right, in Canelo Alvarez back in May. Being the away fighter, not necessarily having anything on his side, and beat him comprehensively enough that they had to give it to him on the scorecards. Then also putting on a masterclass performance against Gilberto Zurdo Ramirez in November down in Abu Dhabi for the championship series, who was his mandatory, defending his WBA light heavyweight title. So all of this is more than enough to be number 1. The only reason I don't have Bivol as my number 1 fighter is because even though he fought the consensus number 1 pound for pound fighter in the world, who was also the undisputed 168 pound champion, he moved up from 168 to 175. So Dimitri Bivol had all the natural advantages. He had the height advantage, which most people normally have, cool. He had the size advantage, he had the reach advantage, he had the amateur pedigree, and I guess the boxing know-how, and he also probably had, pound for pound, the punch power as well. He probably punches a lot harder than Canelo Alvarez does. He was able to take Canelo's power because Canelo was moving up in weights. So again, because he had all the natural physical advantages, you can't say that size doesn't matter in this case. So just due to the fact he had all of those advantages, you say, okay, well, it's not as big a feat as beating that champion at his weight division. So if he goes down to 168 and takes over and dominates Canelo there, then there's more to me of a reason for you to be the number one. Outside of that, again, you go to Gilberto Ramirez, another guy who previously was at 168. Now look, he's a full-blown 175, and now I don't think he can make 168 if you cut off one of his arms. He's that big and rehydrates to over 200 pounds. Yes, he had the height advantage over Bivol, size, maybe punch power, but in terms of boxing skills, he never had the skill level. He's never been in the ring with anyone the skill level of Dimitri Bivol. He's never really been in the ring with anyone that you could call like upper world class, let alone elite. So again, Dimitri Bivol had the stylistic, actually no, to be fair, Zurdo Ramirez had the stylistic advantage, but Bivol had every other advantage in terms of preparation for that fight, being in with, you know, the better opposition, and, you know, living at 175 pounds for his whole career and not simply for like the last 4 or 5 fights. So yeah, those two reasons, they're very minor reasons, and sometimes you've got to find the most mundane reasons to you know, validate your picks. And anyone who says he's number one, I can't really argue with you, because again, he's done some amazing things. He's now almost become this Mexican killer in terms of in the ring. His profile has been boosted, I guess, like 5-fold from where it was before, just due to those 2 wins. So now whenever he has a fight, everyone's going to be talking about it. But yeah, just for those particular reasons, him sort of having the natural advantages over Canelo, and then obviously having the skill and the experience advantage over Ramirez, is just the reason why he's my number 2 and not my number 1. But still, a great place to be. Dimitri Bivol, number 2 male fighter of the year for 2022. So anyone who knows me knows that this is not a surprise, and yeah, I'm gonna always champion activity over anything else, especially when it's, you know, against good top level quality opposition. So my number 1 male fighter of the year for 2022 goes to Jesse Bam Rodriguez. Now look, as I said, I know a lot of people, 99% of the population have got Dimitri Bivol as their fighter of the year, and I won't argue with them. However, as far as I'm concerned, what Bam has done this year in terms of achievements has kind of been a lot more impressive to me. For instance, Bam Rodriguez was a 108 pounder who, on I believe it was 5 days notice, had to fill in for one Francisco Estrada against Carlos Cuadras, and went up to 115 pounds. So put on 7 pounds additional weight that he'd never competed with prior, and then gave a masterful performance against Cuadras, even dropping him, winning a unanimous decision for a belt, again 2 divisions above where he was currently campaigning. Not to mention, in his next fight, he took arguably the biggest puncher in that division, the one person who derailed and, you know, probably you could say to a degree ruined Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez's career with Saritsvikat Sorongvisai, and put on a masterful performance against him. And not only did that, was the only person since his first 2 fights to actually knock him out. And these guys had, I think it's coming up to 60 or just over 60 fights in his career. He only lost his first 2 fights via knockout. Everything else he's won or he lost on points. And this guy came up again from 2 weight classes below and stopped him. Now, You could say that those two, maybe they'd seen better days, they're a bit older in the tooth. That's true, but they are still a part of this Crown, you know, 4 Kings or Fab 5 division if you include Kazuto Ioka in that mix as well. And he took out 2 of them in the first quarter of the year. I mean, the first half of the year, sorry. So that has to go, that has to crown for something. Then he faces Gonzalez in a title defense, sorry, in September. It wasn't his greatest performance, but it was still a comprehensive performance that he won. But this guy, again, is a much fresher, much more dangerous, much more deadly opponent who should have really been a world champion before and was kind of not given a decision that was deserved. And again, Bam dealt with him fairly comprehensively. It was harder than maybe it should have been, but again, that just means that Gonzalez was levels above what people were predicting, as opposed to Bam not being where he should be. He had those 3 fights. He was going to fight again in December, but then he decided his body needed a little bit of a rest. And, you know, when you've been the most active person, you get to take those liberties. You get to make those decisions. So, yeah, with 3 title fights this year, and the added stage of going up 2 different weight divisions, now to the point where he's actually going to drop back down a weight division to 112 pounds to normal flyweight to go and compete for another title there this first quarter of 2023. That's why I give Bam Rodriguez the fighter of the year of 2023 on the men's side. So congrats. Again, I know some people probably going to have different views and think other people should be in this list. Feel free to put them down below. But yeah, that's the list. So